second we will be live. So, I'm gonna make sure everything shares properly and that we're on the Facebook page. There we go. It is telling me we are live, so we'll give folks a minute or two to catch up with us this afternoon, and then we'll begin.
Wonderful.
Actually have it on my other computer here so I can keep an eye on comments as they come in live.
Oh, wow. You got it. Oh, man.
Yeah, multitasking today.
Oh, lots of juggling.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I think we'll give people just another minute or so before we continue. We're just about to begin our latest installment of Live at 5. So. Should be on here. Okay, yeah, we've got a few people watching already. Great, wonderful. Go ahead. And I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the latest installment of the Live at 5 series. I'm Travis Shaw with the Mosby Heritage Area Association, and the idea behind Live at 5 is we take a deep look at a local history topic with a local history expert. And today we are very thankful to have Lee Lawrence with us. Lee is a well-known local preservationist, author. She's transcribed a number of Civil War diaries of people who live in Fauquier and Loudoun counties. And that is going to be the topic of today's segment. Specifically, we are going to look at the diary of Catherine Noland Cochran, who was a well-to-do woman who lived in Middleburg during the Civil War. And during the war years, she recorded her experiences in great detail. She talked about soldiers occupying the town of Middleburg. She talked about nursing wounded soldiers back to health. She talked about the ongoing guerrilla warfare that took place in the area, including famous names like John Singleton Mosby. Talked about enslaved people seeking freedom during wartime. So really the full breadth of wartime experience in Middleburg. So we're very excited to hear more about Catherine Noland Cochran and her experiences during the war. So thank you so much for joining us, Lee.
Thank you, Travis. That was a wonderful introduction to her life and her story. It's Catherine Mary Powell Noland Cochran. She was a great-granddaughter of Levin Powell and Sarah Harrison Powell. Levin Powell, you recall, is the founder of Middleburg. Her father and mother were Lloyd Noland and Ann Whiting Powell Noland. They lived at Glenora, that beautiful farm between Middleburg and Upperville. Catherine married a very prominent physician, William Cochran, and they lived in Middleburg. They had a house on Main Street. William Cochran had a doctor's office right next to his house, and then a pharmacy next to that. Catherine was born at the property Vine Hill, which is now the Sporting Library, but I believe it's from my own research that she lived at the property, and you can show on the Yardley Taylor map if you would,
Yeah,
Travis.
I'll bring up that map. While
She
we're
lived-
at it.
Yeah, there's Catherine.
That's Catherine, okay.
Yeah, wonderful picture of
Um,
Catherine.
And I do have that map for you. There we go.
And there, that was William. That was, we can show him again later. That's her
Okay, there's
husband.
William right
There's
there.
William Cochran. He was the physician. He was actually arrested during the Civil War. The family had lots of adventures.
There's your map.
Okay, if you look, and I'll just show this briefly. It's a little bit difficult to see, but this is Yardley Taylor's 1854 map of Middleburg. The property that the Cochrans lived in is right across from where now there's an Exxon station. There was a house there called Luck House. It was given that name, I believe, in the 1930s. But that house is shown on Yardley Taylor's map as Dr. William Cochran's property. His office was next door and his pharmacy was next to that. They also had a barn, a carriage house, a stables. They owned a property, first of all, you see all the pals, the names of the pals, you see some Nolans there. Catherine's brother was Burr Powell Nolan. He was a Virginia legislator, a judge for Loudoun County, and a lawyer. He had an office in Middleburg, a law office. So she was from a very prominent, extended family. They had a house in Richmond and a farm outside Richmond. They had a farm outside Middleburg on the road to the Plains, Landmark Road. They had a farm out there. Catherine and William spent part of the war actually in Richmond. They spent about 18 months in Richmond. So a lot of her diary is about going back and forth between those properties. So if you can, Travis, can you show her, show Catherine's picture photograph again?
Yes, there she is.
Yeah. Okay, so she started her diary in the spring of 1863. She almost immediately said, oh, I should have started this sooner. I'm going to go back while I remember it because what I'm experiencing is important for future generations. So she went back and filled in those early couple of years. The Cochrans had a son, Henry, who was only 18 when the war began. And when it started, he joined Montgomery's light artillery unit. They had a daughter, Fanny, and she was married. She had 3 little children, babe in arms, toddlers, and they also are in her diary. Now, one thing I will say, anyone who studies primary source material from the 19th century, whether it's diaries, letters, even newspaper articles, you recognize pretty quickly that Americans, whether they're Northern or Southern, are racist. They hold very prejudicial views, and that comes out in their writing. Unfortunately, that also sometimes comes out in Catherine's writing. I will only say a silver lining to that dark cloud when it does come into her diary entry is that we learn about her enslaved servants within her household. We learn about free Blacks that are living in Middleburg or in Loudoun County, and their lives would be lost to us if she had not written a diary. In fact, Catherine's life would have been lost to us. We wouldn't know much about her life other than these beautiful daguerreotypes. So I'm really grateful for this extraordinary diary. I want to actually spend now time reading from it. I want you to hear her narrative, hear how beautifully she tells a story. And the best way to start that, I think, will be with her entries about the Second Battle of Manassas. That was such a huge event. Manassas battlefield was only 18 miles from Middleburg. And so I want to now read. I have had to edit this a little bit because Catherine actually spent several pages on this momentous event, but I want to read it. So please, just if you can, settle back and try to picture what she's describing so beautifully in her diary entry. And Travis, perhaps just that image of Alfred Wode's of Second Battle of Manassas, because Catherine will refer to something.
There we go.
Yeah, it's hard to see from that, but all right. Now this will now be Catherine's voice. This is her entry. Second Battle of Manassas, August 29th and 30th, 1862. One day a soldier came with news that Jackson's corps would pass the plains next morning, and people were asked to bring supplies to that point. It seemed incredible, but Jackson was always doing incredible things. And didn't we cook? We went to the plains and gave out food all along his route. The corps passed on, and before many hours, the old Bull Run mountains echoed with roar of artillery. Longstreet was following in Jackson's wake, but would he arrive in time? To our impatience, how slowly he moved. We listened to the roar of cannon. We feared Jackson would be destroyed before reinforcements reached him. The townsmen all left us and went to the high hills where they could guess at the fortunes of the battle by the direction the smoke took. Day by day, that dreadful boom fell heavy on our hearts. By the last day of the fight, can I ever forget it? For 5 hours, it was one continuous roar. I shut myself into a room, closed windows and doors, and stopped my ears to be rid of the maddening sound. At dark, it ceased, but who could tell the result? We sat in silence. The country around where the fighting occurred was now so desolate after 2 years of war had scattered its people. We set to work and improvised a hospital in the old Methodist church. Then we sent a wagon of provisions to the field and asked to have 50 wounded sent back to us. Soon the ambulances began to arrive with their ghastly freight, and the church was filled to overflowing with men who were like famished wolves. A great number of the wounded were brought here. No provision had been made for them. No commissary stores sent with them. Day after day, in rolled the heavy army wagons laden with mutilated and suffering humanity. Every vacant house and room were soon filled, even the churches. Then, the weather being warm, the men were laid in the yards and on the pavements. Not only had we to feed the wounded, but the multitudes of teamsters and attendants, all literally famishing. We cooked from morning till night, but there was an unbroken stream of hungry men. How we worked. We took no account of days, no Sabbath, no day of rest. Up with the dawn, and first breakfast for our own families and the many wounded in our houses, then breakfast for the hospitals. We had arranged that certain ladies should attend certain hospitals. Jubal Early's division fell to my lot. Never before did I realize the horrors of war. Not less than 1,800 men were in the hospitals here. The surgeons said the mortality was unusually small, but the wounds seemed frightful to me, and the long rows of fresh graves in our cemetery showed that death reaped his harvest. Our greatest difficulty was to find clothing to take the place of the men's rags, stiffened with blood and dirt, which were torn off to dress their wounds. But after our supplies of old garments were exhausted, we cut up sheets, curtains, lounge covers, even our old dresses to make shirts and drawers for the men. And then off they marched. All right, that's, like I said, I've had to shorten that slightly, but what extraordinary images.
Absolutely. And yeah, the detail is incredible.
It's extraordinary. And that last bit about men marching off wearing old dresses cut up for shirts and drawers. It's just, those are the kind of details which I love from her writing. Now, she goes on, you know, it's only, 2.5 weeks later, the Battle of Antietam. And Catherine occasionally has a dry sense of humor, and that will come out. I have a short entry I want to read you here after the Battle of Antietam. So this is after September 17th, 1862. Middleburg. The wagon trains were passing all day, on which we read the names so familiar since the war: Porter, Meade, Slocum, Franklin, etc. The main column passed through the day before without any breaking ranks, only grinning, singing, and looking like the demons they are. But all this day, straggling parties would come into the yard. They're stealing chickens and vegetables. I've been kept busy going from door to window to keep them from gaining entrance. The yard's full of them, mostly Dutch. I heard a great commotion, and going out found them jabbering away, threatening to burn the house and scraping matches against the wall. Oh, I told them I'd heard that threat too many times to be afraid. I laugh now when I think of some of my conversations, but I was too mad then. I couldn't help quarreling with them. One fellow said, "Got any bread?" "No." "Got any pies?" "No." A pause. "Got any milk?" "No." "Got any eggs?" "No." A pause. Well, got any apples? No. Finally, no, he says. Well, you sure must be poor off. And I think that's her. Sure must be poor off. Now, Travis, you mentioned earlier she does write about John Singleton Mosby and his battalion, and she actually starts writing about him months even before June the 10th, 1863, when he officially starts the battalion. And she describes him as one time, like when he passes through Middleburg and he's got 35 Union soldiers in front of him, but she writes, Mosby, as always, bringing up the rear, looking as cool and nonchalant as if he has been out partridge hunting. So she's got this extraordinary way of describing him. And she sometimes says when she sees him pass through town quickly, she says, he doesn't have his usual don't care-ish manner today. So he's off to a skirmish or a raid. But one thing I learned from her, which I only had read with this much detail in her diary, and I'm going to read it now. And some of our Mosby aficionados might not actually know this story. And here again, she'll be a little bit disparate. Well, she will be disparaging about a Jewish fellow, but like I say, that's part and parcel of reading these accounts written in the 19th century. So this is October 1864. Here's what she says. A little episode worth recording is characteristic of the times. For several months, a vulgar, insolent fellow has been trading between Middleburg and Washington, a Jew named Worsley, bringing us Washington goods for which he charges exorbitant prices and carrying off tobacco and Yankee money. Everyone distrusted him, for we couldn't believe that with the blockade so strict everywhere, why should he be allowed to pass in and out? We suspected he was doing the Yankee government some service in return, but we needed supplies, so we had no choice but to deal with him. It's now known that he was a Yankee spy, allowed to carry on trade in order to detect the Southern sympathizers amongst the merchants in Washington, but also to get information here of Mosby's movements. Worsley got his goods at a greatly reduced price in Washington and then sold them here at enormous profits to Southern people. This wretch, Worsley, says he was employed by General Augur. Worsley has left Middleburg largely in debt to us, but we deserve that for trading with him. He was an agent for General Augur, and the whole scheme was an ingenious Yankee trick to detect disloyal merchants and at the same time catch Mosby or his men coming in to buy supplies. Now, actually, Worsley also wrote a very short memoir, which I've got. It's at the, I think, Case Reserve. Is that the name? Case Reserve University? Yeah, I can.
Reserve. Yep.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I can scan it if anybody listening is interested in reading Worsley's side of this event. He calls himself like Yankee spy for Mosby's battalion or something like that, whatever. And it's just maybe 8 or 10 pages, and I will happily scan it and send it if someone wants to read it. I have one more brief, very brief entry here, October the 17th, 1864, regarding John Mosby. And I have to include it because I think it now will leave everyone with this wonderful image of John Mosby that they maybe have never had before. This is October 17, 1864. I was just now startled by a squad of Yankees passing the window. In less than 10 minutes, they left, carrying off a citizen whom they found hiding in a corn patch. Unfortunately, Mosby's battalion was nowhere near, a fact of which the Yanks were doubtless apprised. Twice during the past week, Mosby was here in high spirits, just back from his raid on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. He'd taken 80 men, they'd laid in wait for a train, They threw it off the tracks, and the battalion secured a quartermaster with $165,000 in greenbacks on the train, which enabled them to divide out $2,500 to each man. Mosby, as usual, refused to take a cent. His only trophy was a gorgeous pair of red slippers, one of which he sported on his wounded foot. Can't you just see that? Here's this tough guy back from that extraordinary famous raid, and he's got a gorgeous slipper on his wounded foot. And it's only from Catherine that we can learn such a very important detail. All right, the last, if I may, the last diary entry, and then we can, if anyone has a question, or Travis, if you have a question. This is now the end of the war, November 11th, 1864. The war is coming to an end. This is the last autumn. By spring, it will be over. Our whole area is absolutely destitute. And here is perhaps my favorite story, my favorite entry of her diary. This is November 11th, 1864. Here she goes. I always vowed that no lack of dry goods should ever tempt me to put myself in a position to be bullied by the insolent Yankee officials. But hearing that neighbors in Clark County were crossing the river and getting goods, I too decided to go. So off I started in a wagon and got safely to our friends, the McCormicks, where I spent the night. Next morning, Mrs. Mack and I took up our line of march for Yankee Land. She'd been over there 3 weeks before and got what she wanted without any difficulty. But now she found herself bewildered about the road, and it was all new ground to me. We had to ask our way of the people we met, and no two gave us the same direction. We were aiming to reach Shepherdstown without falling in with Yankee pickets, but we took the wrong road, and meeting an old Negro, we received information that the pickets were just ahead of us. On Smithfield Pike, we were halted by a picket who, on hearing that where we were bound, passed us through. Congratulating ourselves on getting safely through, we pushed on. It was getting late in the evening, and we thought we were near Shepherdstown when, to our dismay, just ahead of us, we saw a picket post, tents and all. We could do nothing but go forward. I left Mrs. Mack to do all the talking, for I can't speak civilly to a Yankee, and this was no time to provoke them. She politely asked if we could go on and was told that yes, she could get a pass from the provost marshal half a mile away. She inquired where we were and was horrified to be told we were near Kearneysville, the most obnoxious post on the whole road, one which we were specifically warned to avoid. Soon we encountered a captain who, on hearing we wanted a pass to cross the river, told us we could have one if we took the oath of allegiance. Well, we declined, saying we were not willing to take any oath. Travis, can you put that? I've got a provost marshal post, very typical how she described. Yes, she describes it as having tents and men milling about. The captain then delivered us an oration on our obligations to this great and beneficent government which protected us. Mrs. McCormick, having had her house burnt to the ground last month by order of General Custer. If we were not willing to take the oath, it showed that we sympathized with the enemy and we did not deserve any favors. I was anxious here to retrace our steps, but Mrs. Mack thought as we had come so far, it would be a pity to give up. She asked to be taken to the provost. We were sent under guard. My heart sank when the huge Kearneysville depot loomed up before us with a long train of cars being laden with provisions for Sheridan's army. I felt myself in the lion's mouth And worst of all, I had put myself there. We were taken before the provost, who was a good-looking young fellow, so we hoped for kind treatment. We made known our errand. "Oh, yes," he said, "we could go on if we took the oath." Well, nothing could induce us to take it. The captain's manner changed. He questioned us closely and doubted the truth of our answers. He gave us more rigmarole about our duty to this good government and his suspicion that we sympathized with the rebellion. "What I generally do with ladies like you is to send them on to Martinsburg," he replied. On this hint, I leaned into Mrs. Mack. "We had best turn around and go back." The provost walked with us to the door, not as an act of civility, but to inspect our horses. Unfortunately, I had driven a very fine pair of horses, which had until now been hidden from the Yankees most carefully. These horses attracted his attention, for he said something to our guard and then moved off. We climbed hastily into the wagon, hoping we were free to depart, but were told that we must await the captain's return from the colonel's tent. We sat, quaking, not knowing why we were detained, night coming on, train after train thundering by. After a long delay, the captain returned with the colonel, but neither looked towards us. They went to the office. Another long delay, and the colonel walked out, taking no notice of us. Mrs. Mack called to him, and he came up. She asked to be allowed to leave. In the blandest manner, he told us, yes, we could do so by taking the oath, urging us then in persuasive tones, going over the same old story of the beneficent government and the glorious flag. He then left us saying, "I would advise you ladies to take the oath." Then came up a sergeant who said he had orders to search the wagon, to which we willingly agreed. We were quite unaware that our colored driver had secreted under the straw a box of tobacco, which he had hoped to trade for goods once we crossed the Potomac River. The discovery of the tobacco would have confiscated the wagon and the horses and consigned us to prison. The captain ordered our satchels, which contained only our night clothes, to be taken in for examination. I said, "Give me my gown. I can show you there's nothing in it." And shaking it out, open, I then rolled it up and held it in my lap. The satchels were taken and thoroughly searched, even ripping open the linings. Out came the sergeant again saying, "The captain says you must send in your night slip." So in it had to go. What treason they suspected lurked in my night slip, I can't say, but enough time was spent examining it for me to have sewn another one just like it. Mrs. Mack, wishing to be civil, said, "Captain, the wagon is filled with hay. Do you wish to examine that as well?" Well, he became furious. He asked her what she meant. Did she intend to insult him? She earnestly declared she had not, little dreaming what a risk she had run with the tobacco under our very feet. Our driver, Alfred, was a free mulatto boy who had drifted into our service from the army, very bright and cunning, but the most mendacious liar. He was then called in and questioned as to our names and residences, and given many offers of high wages and appeals to enlist with them. Never so pleased as when an opportunity came to tell a falsehood, Alfred assured them that Mrs. Mack and I were good Union people. Well, this they doubted, saying they knew we were rebels, especially the, quote, little woman, me. Then they inquired if we had sons in the army, and the voracious Alfred assured them we did not. I almost felt like going back when Alfred later repeated that conversation. I would have told him I had but one son and he was in the army, and if I had 20, they'd be there too. The colonel told the sergeant to go out and see if the horses were fit for service, and if so, to take them and let the ladies get back as they could. Alfred said, "No, sir. No, sir. That sorrel horse belongs to me. You can't take that. And the other is ruptured. And being of the privileged color, his claim was respected. After a weary time, he came out and we were allowed to depart. We turned the wagon around, headed back for home as fast as the fine horses could take us. And that's how she ends that entry. And it just, is that not like a storybook?
Yeah, I mean, just again, the detail that she puts into it,
Yeah.
and what I find so interesting is, she's there with this African American man, this mulatto boy who works for her, and it's his word that gets them out of this situation. I find that so fascinating.
He's the hero. He's the hero of the whole story. He's the reason she's not taken to prison in Martinsburg. So yeah, that's what I meant when I said earlier about we learn about some lives that we would have no knowledge of. And we have to take the rough language with that fact. We have to take that into account. And also, I don't know who Mrs. McCormick was. I hope to do some more research. I just love that whole tale of them going off together and having this experience. And
that's fascinating.
Just what they went through. So
great.
It's a good diary.
Well, we do have a few questions about the diary, if you don't mind. I'm going to go ahead. I'll get us back on the screen here. One of the first questions we got was, how did you come across this diary, and how have you gone about transcribing it?
When I first researched Katherine Brown's diary, who's also a Middleburg resident, she mentioned, of course, this woman. She mentioned Catherine Mary Cochran. This diary is actually in the Richmond, Virginia Museum of History and Culture. The original diary was put in there by the family. The Sporting Library has a typed copy of it, as do several other historical societies around the country. I first read it from the Kentucky Historical Society, and it's just so extraordinarily good. She's so educated. She's such a good writer. Her experiences traveling back and forth to Richmond just made me want to research it.
Now, are there any plans to maybe publish this diary for sale where anyone can pick up a copy? Is that down the road? Because I know you've published several diaries in the past.
Yeah, I think it's probably it's important enough. It should be read. It's got a lot of areas that could be further researched, and we could learn a lot more. That little scene, even of the men in Middleburg going to the hilltop and looking at smoke from Second Manassas and trying to discern the battle's outcome from the smoke. Those are the kind of images which, to someone like myself, makes this war really come home. The experiences that civilians had, the battlefield was 4 years of fighting, but like I said earlier, the cultural war started decades before and then went on for decades after that war. So all of her ideas on race, her ideas on the Union, the Confederacy, all of those things just are worth studying and trying to understand. So we'll see, maybe one day.
We did have a question about the cavalry battles around Middleburg in June of 1863. Does she write about the Battle of Middleburg?
Okay, no, because she writes about him, and after she knows about him because she hears about him, but during those battles, she's in Richmond. Okay. She spends 18 months of the war in Richmond, and she follows information going on in Loudoun County, but she's not here to see. What a shame. What a shame that she's not here for those days of that cavalry battle. But yeah, she doesn't add our knowledge to that.
We have another question, and I think you did touch upon this earlier with the first excerpt that you read about Catherine ministering to the wounded. You talked about the aftermath of Second Manassas. What you say, like 1,500 men or 1,800 men
She
came?
did 1,800, right?
1,800 men. Were there other skirmishes or battles where there were wounded men brought to Middleburg that she helped with?
Yes, we know from after First Manassas, there were men brought here. We know that after Antietam, I'm not sure how many men were brought to Middleburg after Antietam, but we know that there were some wounded here. She focuses on Second Manassas because at that time, the population of Middleburg was perhaps around 400. And if you think that of that population number, a lot of the men were gone, a lot of them were children. When you have 1,800, some of them grievously wounded, she says some of them stayed for months in the community. That's overwhelming to imagine. When she says they worked and they missed Sabbath days, she's talking for weeks and weeks and weeks of strenuous work. She writes about that for a long period of time. And she mentions, the wonderful thing is she also mentions specific names, which is another reason I'd love to get this diary actually up online if possible, because there's family members out there that don't know that their ancestors were wounded and perhaps nursed in Middleburg. But she gives names of or regiments that they were in. So it's great information.
We did have Rich Gillespie did chime in, our historian emeritus. He knows who your Miss McCormick is, Miss Province McCormick, and he says Clark County Historical Association has the information.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, Rich, thank you so much. Thank you. I will definitely follow up on that. She's just wonderful. The two of these women heading off on that experience, I just really want to learn more about her. So thank you, Rich.
Now, a question I had, I've read Katherine Brown's diary in Middleburg, and she does mention on several occasions, her enslaved workers escaping or going over to the Union Army. Is that also going on within the Cochran household?
It is. I left. Yes. I left out intentionally because this isn't perhaps the format to talk about this issue in detail. But yes, she has really amazing experiences with her and enslaved workers and with free Blacks in the Middleburg area who see her husband, William, talking to John Mosby, and they end up, the free Black community members end up burning down the Cochran's Carriage House in retribution for what they perceive as a tax on them. I'm being vague. I don't mean to. Let me tell it briefly, if I may.
Sure, absolutely.
Make it very brief. John Mosby with some men come into town telling 3 or 4 free Black women that they have to leave. They have to leave Middleburg because they are suspected for having spied for the Union Army. John Mosby and William Cochran are standing outside the Cochran house talking, and word gets back to the free Black community in Middleburg, where the free Black community apparently assumes that Dr. Cochran is passing on information about them. And in retribution, they come apparently and burn down the Cochran's Carriage House, and they lose a lot of their carriage and things in their stables. And that's just one example of how fraught the relationship becomes, between the races. And there's many more examples like that in her diary, more than in Catherine's diary and even Amanda Edmonds' diary.
Right. Now, her husband's job as a physician in Middleburg is obviously a fairly privileged position, I would assume. You know, they're well-to-do financially, and I would imagine a lot of status within the town as well, and with her connections to other wealthy families. How do they get on after the war? When the war is over, you know, obviously it's a tremendous hardship on everyone, whether a secessionist or a unionist, you're free, you're enslaved. It's a tremendous disruption. How are they after the war? Is there any kind of postscript to this?
There is the hardship they suffer is primarily through the loss of their beloved daughter Fanny. She dies in childbirth in September 1865, and I suspect, and then Catherine raises the four little girls that to which Fanny was the mother, including the little baby that was born when the mother dies. Henry survives the war, so he goes on. He's successful. I think he becomes a doctor as well, if I recall. Catherine's family does well. They had losses, of course, because everyone did, but we can't assume that they suffered the way a lot of people would have suffered who didn't have two farms and two houses. They had a house, remember, they had lots of property, they had lots of connections. So she lived a long life. All of them lived long lives, other than the daughter Fanny. I've been very, very fortunate in having contacted and interacted with Catherine's descendant, one of her descendants who lives in Madison, and that's from whom we got these wonderful pictures that we've seen of Catherine and William, and I've got others which I haven't shown, but it might be fun. I hope to maybe go down after all this virus social distancing is over. I'd like to go down and actually meet with some of the family members.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, just checking to see if we have any other questions here. Now would be the chance. We do have our good friend Alison Herring is out there watching, talking about the connection to the Powell family, of course.
Oh, yeah. Well, Alison, she knows so much more. She's the expert on the Powells, so she knows an awful lot more than I do.
Yeah, it's just remarkable to me that all these families are so closely related to one another.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, very, very interesting. You know, we're running a little short on time here, but there was a passage that you shared with me before we started this talk. You shared it with me a few weeks ago about she's describing Union cavalry entering the town, and I don't know if you have that handy. I could probably pull it up. The one about the Washington lifeguards entering the town, because I just find that passage so evocative.
I did too, and I didn't bring it with me because I didn't bring all of the diary. That I loved, again, through her ability to describe something. She's describing these men passing through Middleburg. She says that she always can hear troops because of their sabers rattling. She can tell if they're cavalry because of all that clanking. But she talks about the night when these men pass through in complete silence.
So I found it, actually, I have the email from you, so if you don't mind, I would love to read it, because I think this passage is fascinating. September 27th, 1864. Last night I was roused by the tramp of cavalry, and going to the window could only discern in the darkness the figures of men, but their perfect silence and slow measured movement told they were Yankees. Mm-hmm. After they passed, we settled down to sleep again, concluding we should have them back in the morning. Breakfast was scarce over before they were, and in the light of day we could appreciate their gorgeous outfit. the blue and gilt, untarnished by camp life, horses fat and sleek, many of the gallants with jaunty little cloaks, hooded and tasseled, thrown over their shoulders. Knights, doubtless, airing their valor by a little excursion through a peaceful country. I really love how descriptive she is.
And you notice, Travis, she's a little bit critical. You pick up on a little bit of her making fun of how beautifully dressed they are. Their little capes and,
and their horses are fat and they've never
and
seen
sleek, yes.
campaigning before. Yeah.
But she's obviously really, that's so evocative, and she's really impressed by their measured walk and their silence as they pass through Middleburg. I wish you could find out more about that Washington Life Guard.
Yeah, like I said, it appears they were a Washington D.C. militia company, but that's my project to work on.
Please.
We do have another question. They're asking about the other diary you mentioned of the merchant and possible spy. What was his name?
Yeah, his name was Pardon Worsley, and he was eventually tried. By tried, I mean he was taken to court on his shenanigans, and that's how the information came out that he was actually tracking Mosby. And I will happily, if somebody gives you their email address, I will happily pass on to you his maybe 10 or 12 pages, his memoir.
If you would send that to me, I'd be happy to put it up on the Facebook page for this event, so that folks can take a look at that as well, because we have at least one person who would be interested in reading that. And I know I'd be interested in reading that as well.
Okay. He worked with Augur, General Augur. And you recall General Augur, in fact, after Lincoln's assassination, Augur was responsible for a lot of that investigation, and Pardon Worsley turns up on that again as well. He claims that he's one of the people claiming Mosby was behind the assassination. So, it's all just a nest of
a web. Yeah. That's funny because Augur came up in our discussion last night on our History on Tap. I guess he had a run-in with Ida Powell Delaney when he was in the area.
Yeah, he did. That's right. Catherine talked, and her diary mentions that too. Yeah. Ida was a cousin of Catherine's, you remember, because they're all, like you said a while ago, they're all kin.
Well, fantastic. If anybody else has any last questions, please let us know. This has been a wonderful discussion, Lee.
Thank you, Travis.
Very excited to hear more about this diary. Now, Lee has transcribed 2 other diaries, both of which are actually available from the Mosby Heritage Area Association, and that would be Katherine Brown's diary and
Amanda Edmonds. Yeah.
Amanda Edmonds. 2 other ladies from the area. So if this kind of information appeals to you, this kind of intimate look at what life was like during the war, those would be great resources. Any other, if you're interested in kind of reading more about the civilian experience, are there any other sources that you would recommend, Lee?
Locally, you've kind of caught me off on that. A lot of what I find out interesting, because our area was occupied by Union Army men, they wrote about our area. If you really want to do a little bit of a deep dive, it's fascinating to read the Union men's take on what Loudoun County was like. Most of them were very impressed how beautiful Loudoun County is in the Shenandoah Valley. So that's something which a lot of the regiments have up on their websites. If you typed in like Ohio 9th Regiment, Infantry Regiment, they'll have diaries, and that, I mean, you talk about going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. A lot of material to cover.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Lee. That was absolutely wonderful. Very fascinating discussion. And thank you to everyone who followed along with us at home. We will be back next Friday with another installment of Live at 5. But as always, if there is a topic you're interested in or a speaker that you'd like to hear from, you can always let us know either on Facebook or at our website, mosbyheritagearea.org. And thank you so much and have a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. Bye-bye.